Thank you very much for joining us for this LGW conversation with Amy Harbison, class of 2010 Tenacious. And our subject is rewiring, creating a meaningful roadmap for retiring. And Amy is a trained transition coach. She's going to take us through some best practices for planning your retirement and then for retiring. So we're very thrilled to offer this. And again, we had a lot of people sign up, so must be on a lot of people's minds. Anyway, Amy, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for offering to present this to our fellow members. And let me just ask, how did you become a trained transition coach? What led you to that?
Well, I am, I think, a perfect poster child for someone who had an encore career. I spent most of my career in communications and marketing, working for a lot of associations, nonprofits, in philanthropy for the Meyer Foundation, and also as an independent consultant. And I just reached a point where I started listening to this little yearning voice that just told me I needed something new. And I was in my early 50s when this happened. And actually, one of our Leadership Greater Washington folks, Margarita Rosenfeld, was responsible for introducing me to the idea of becoming a coach, and kind of the rest is history. And it was something I never saw coming. I thought I had a very happy career for most of my life, but I wound up redirecting myself into work that I have really, really loved. So it is possible to have an encore career if you're interested in something before the full retirement.
So we're obviously talking about retirement today. How has it changed over the years? What changes have you noticed in the past many years? Is it?
Well, it's really,
people are retiring now.
It's really dramatic, Doug. It's a very different thing. I mean, you know, our parents' generation, there was this sort of stereotypic rocking chair on the porch where people's best days were behind them, and it seemed as though they were just, you know, for lack of a better way of putting this, kind of waiting to die. Like these were their golden years and they were just going to wait it out. And it couldn't be more different from where we are today. We have 10,000 people every day turning 65 in this country. And because it's the boomer generation who has changed everything that they've landed on, they are changing retirement, which is part of why we called this session rewiring. It's even the term retirement has been so outmoded. We're no longer just waiting. We're actually reinventing it in very different ways. And I think what we're seeing is that people really want to thrive at this stage. They don't necessarily want to strive in the same way. They're not kind of reaching for the golden ring for the next ladder, level on the ladder. They really want to kind of look at their life differently and rethink where they are. So, and I really believe there is no one size fits all to this. So you're going to hear things and you may already be retired and say, I didn't do this. You may be retiring very soon and say, I don't have time for some of the things you're suggesting. That's fine. It's not too late. And everyone does retirement differently. We all have different circumstances around it. So, and I would say the last thing is, I think the word retirement is so outmoded. If any of you brilliant minds on this call today come up with a better term than retirement or even rewiring, I would love for you to share it, because I think we're in desperate need of new vocabulary going forward.
Some of the stats that Rebecca put up in the chat are really interesting. You had mentioned that 10,000 people turn 65 every day, but the number of people 75 and older in the labor force is expected to grow almost a double by 2030.
Yes,
it's amazing. It's amazing.
People are not necessarily retiring. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities here. Not only can people rethink fully retiring, but also employers may really need people who are considering retirement to stay in the workforce because they're losing other people. And so there may be a reconfiguring going on here. So I think that stat reflects what's really possible moving forward. And also the economic jolts we see make people feel like they want a little more stability as well.
Now, when I, sort of growing up and now even, I'm thinking of retirement, it's financially, what can I do financially? Can I afford to retire? But in my conversation with you, it's a lot more than just finances. There's a heck of a lot more to retirement. So how about if you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, we know the financial piece is critical. I'm not in any way pretending that is not a linchpin in this discussion. I think what I'm suggesting is there's so much more to think about than exclusively the financial piece. What the financial piece does, and it should be an early part of this process, is to really help you determine what you can afford. Really, what would retirement look like? Can you afford to retire? Retiring is a privilege that not everyone can afford to do. And retirement is also not something that everyone is wanting to do right away. So going to the financial planner is a way to get a good baseline of where you are so that you can literally free your mind to start thinking about these other pieces. And what they include are these non-financial pieces that are so important is thinking about who you are now. You are not the person you were at 30. You're not the person you were at 40. You are not the person, for many of us who may be on this call, the person you were at 50. So who are you now? What is most important to you now at this stage of your life? And a recent survey showed that 37% of retirees say they have no retirement savings. And yet those that are not thinking about this bigger picture and just retire may run the risk. There's about a 20%, research shows about 20% of people who retire without any kind of thought to it can suffer from depression because there's a real connection for many people to their work. And it's time to think about who you are without the name tag, in a town where, if you're in the DC area, what's the first thing you're asked when you go to a networking event is not even like, tell me about yourself. It's, what do you do? And so what are you when you're not your job anymore is a really important thing to start thinking about before you leave. And for some people, that's a really, really difficult shift. So that's why we have to look at more than just the financial, but the financial and non-financial really inform each other going forward.
So what other factors constitute a successful retirement? What else goes into it to make retirement work for people?
Well, we have like 15 factors really. And when you all leave today—
Of course you do, Amy, of course you do.
When you all leave today, you're going to see the list of 15. I couldn't take the whole time going through each of these. They all have different definitions, et cetera. But what I can talk to you about is the fact that many of these are attitudinal. There's a whole bunch of these that are about what is your relationship with your job? What would it look like if you removed yourself from work? And have you started to detach enough from work so that you are thinking through what it looks like to be without this title? A lot of it is, what do you feel about aging? What do you feel about retirement? What do you think retirement is going to be like for you later? And what's your preparation look like now? So there's a lot that's about attitudes about getting older, aging, and what retirement means to you. Is it a glass half full experience, or are you really feeling that your best days are behind you? That's a very different mindset for people. So it's really important to consider those things. It's also really important to know there are two that go very much hand in hand. One of them is your adaptability, which is your, ability to be flexible, to deal with the unknown things that come up in this stage of life with more frequency. And also your self-directedness. How much are you able to take the initiative to make change or make decisions in your life without being dependent on other people for input. Those are huge pieces. And in fact, those are two, I would say, red flag if you don't have a kind of self-directedness as well as this ability to adapt to change, to not be locked into a rigid way of being. Those can be red flags for you as you move into retirement. So they're really important. Obviously, things like dependence and your partnership, if you have one, and also your replacement of work. What is going to be your purpose after work? Are you going to continue to give back in some way? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to continue to work in some way? That is a really important piece to consider. And your health, I mean, we can't say enough about health. Health changes everything, and it determines what this next phase of your life is about. One thing I didn't mention earlier that's incredibly important about this phase, it could last 30 plus years. I mean, think about it. It's one of the longest adult developmental stages that we have. And while we may be in different stages of health in all of these, there's a period in which we are hopefully very vital and very able to still engage, travel, do. And there may be periods as we move further in to later life where health plays more of a role, and then we have to reconfigure again. But we have to understand this is a lot of years to be thinking about, and we want to make the best of this time that we have without sort of just thinking that all of this yawning time is going to be fruitful for us. We need to feel like we're getting up every morning with some purpose, with some level of engagement of things. And our health is really a big factor all through that. So those are some of the major considerations. And as I said, you'll be able to hold these top 15 in your hand and just sort of gauge how are you doing? What gives your life meaning now? What do you think will give your life meaning when you're retired? Those are great kinds of questions to ask yourself.
So just a couple comments for those in the audience. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them and bring them up and allow you to talk to Amy. And you mentioned being retired for 30 plus years. My father-in-law was an Air Force pilot.
Wow.
He was retired from the Air Force longer than he served in the Air Force. I mean, it's sort of remarkable when you think about it. But it's true. People living longer nowadays, you can be retired for quite some time.
Women are living to about, I think the last statistic was about 79, and men, because I think there's been a little bit of a downturn, maybe it's around 73 or so, 74 is the average life expectancy. But we know people who, you know, we have Harry Belafonte, who just died today, lived to 92 years old. People are living a long time, and that's just, there's such potential here that people should feel hopefully excited about what's possible at this stage of life.
So something that's been a constant in my life is change. It started when I started my professional career. I worked for AT&T during the time of the AT&T breakup, and every year I worked for a company with a different name. It was all part of AT&T, but it was just different. So it's something I've sort of grown up with. I think people nowadays, change is constant. You know, particularly with COVID, we're seeing that all the time.
Yes.
And retirement is a huge change for people. How do what do you need to be aware of to help you process that change and to take advantage of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. The important thing to understand, I think, is to give yourself some time, even if you're retiring tomorrow. And I know we have Debbie who will be retiring very soon. Even if you're retiring tomorrow, just recognize that what you're feeling initially may change. It may be this kind of euphoria. For some people, there may be this sadness, but I think until you go through the 3 stages of transition, I think you really haven't gone through the whole of the change. And when I say transition is 3 parts. The first part, believe it or not, we start with an end. So transition starts with saying goodbye to something. It's closing a door on something. So there can be a lot of emotion, a lot of grieving. Even if you're excited about the change, you are not going to be that same work person in the same way. And there are people in your lives you may not see as much. There are responsibilities you may be saying goodbye to, an institution that you've loved, and just the way you felt about yourself and identified yourself. So giving yourself time to grieve that loss, however it shows up for you in whatever timeline, is just really important. So if you're initially euphoric and then you feel a little sadness come on, it's completely normal, and you're just needing to process a little bit of that grief, maybe a little bit delayed. So know that that's the first stage of it. And then we come to the messy middle, which is, as a coach, I love this period, but I think people going through it are white knuckling a little bit, which is the messy middle of not really knowing what's next, not really knowing what retirement is going to be. And it feels like you can't see the forest for the trees at this stage. You may be past the initial grief or goodbye, but you don't know what door is opening yet. And it's a very awkward, uncomfortable period of not knowing. And we like to know. People like to know what's ahead of them. So I think that people have to recognize there may be a period of feeling a little unmoored and a little bit, like the anchor is not set yet. This is the place where the yummy work actually happens. This is where you start to explore options. You start to say, maybe I'm not done working. I'd love to do one more thing part-time, or, I don't want to work at all. That's not for me, but I'd love to do some volunteering. I'd love to contribute on a board in some way. Or it may be that someone just says, I'm spending the next 6 months traveling, and then I'll rethink this phase of life. So I think this middle period is very yeasty and delicious, but it is kind of white knuckling through the discomfort of not knowing what's ahead, and then moving out to really identifying, this is what I love. This is what I want to be doing now. Here are some hobbies. Here are some new areas and new avenues for myself. That's when you start to really feel like you see potential pathways. And the beauty is there's no one path, no right path. There could be several satisfying paths, but those 3 stages will happen, and they may just not happen in any particular timeline that's linear for you. It just is part of a big life transition. So be good to yourself. Just be kind to yourself through it.
We got a great comment from Emily Rothberg. Emily, why don't you speak up and talk to us, please?
Oh, gracious. Hi, Amy.
Hi, how are you?
Put you on the spot, Emily.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm shy.
Yeah.
Well, this topic, thank you, Amy. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I think we connected, and my own journey just around it. I did some homework around the word retirement, and you are so spot on. Retire is to seclude ourselves, to leave. To retire is to be passive, and I did a little homework, and there's the Spanish term for it is jubilación. Who speaks Spanish? I don't know. I speak French, so jubilación is not. I don't know how to say it, but that feels over the top too. Like our society. These are your golden years. These are it's like bullshit. I mean, come on, right? So your point is so important. We lack the vocabulary. And then on top of it, the world that we experience is not so kind to us. And I think especially as older women. And anyway, I'll stop with that because it's such an important, great topic.
Emily, thank you for that idea. It's an interesting thing because, aging, you can't help but layer aging on top of this topic of retirement. And you could have a 9-day workshop on these topics, but I think what you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, about it's hard on women, I think in some ways it's great for women, because I think this is the first stage of life where we can stop giving to everyone else and put ourselves first in a way. But I do think what can be hard, especially for those people who do want to work, if they've left work, trying to re-enter work, maybe if you've taken time off and try to go back, it's not a kind, we're not a kind country to older people in terms of re-engaging people. And that's why I often recommend in my work for people to stay at their work and begin the pivot to just thinking some of these things through first, because it is often harder to leave and come back into something. It really depends on your network, obviously your skill set and all of that. But this is a complicated phase of life, there's no question. And but I really do choose to see that there's a lot of really wonderful potential here for people to live the life they most wanted to live, to really be the person that they most wanted. In fact, the flyer you're going to get has a quote on the bottom from David Bowie, who says, "Aging is an extraordinary process where you become the person you always should have been." And I do believe that's true here, is that no matter what your health is, no matter what your financial circumstances, you can start to pivot to reclaim your life in a way that works for you. And that's what I wish for all of you in retirement.
If I could add something, my wife, Barbara, I think really lives what you two just talked about. I mean, she has divided her career into 3 phases. The first phase, about 20 years, was raising a family. When the oldest one went to college and helped pay for that, she entered her second career, which is working in the senior living community and providing assistance and help and, for people who are aging and couldn't live by themselves anymore. She did that for 20 years. And now she said, okay, I've done enough. Now I'm going to go do what I really want to do. She's starting a landscape design business. Wow. So it's just, it's incredible the opportunities that are out there and how you can make these changes and pivot towards them. And she'd been planning this for some time. So that gets me into, if you are thinking about retiring, say like in the next 5 years, or in Debbie Kaplan's case, in the next month, what are the first steps you should take? What are some of the steps you should take as you start to think about this?
I think we have a slide that helps with some of this. So I would say, first of all, I do believe meeting with a financial planner who has a good sense and really has a focus on retirement, to get a good picture of your current and projected financial situation. It is really important to have a good sense of whether you can afford to retire. And if you can't, what would it take for you to retire? So that lets you know you might want to phase your retirement in some way, or that you're looking to retire in 4 or 5 years instead of immediately. What that does is it takes this sort of scarcity mindset, the fear mindset of I don't have enough money, and maybe you do have money and you really weren't looking at it right because you were so fearful that you didn't. But it could be a wake-up call that maybe you need to start saving as much as you possibly can in the next 4 years to get in a better position. So meet with that financial planner. I would start to just, even in a minimal way, start to understand a little bit more about Social Security and about things like Medicare, and just understand even the basics of it. And there are good resources out there for you to at least start to dabble. These are complicated topics, and certainly your financial planner can help with that. What I believe the financial planner piece will do is take space out of your brain and leave some real estate for you to start to think about these other bigger life questions that I hope you'll ask yourself. The next thing I would do, if you haven't done this, and this is honestly true at any age, this is not really meant for just later life, but working on your advance directives, your living will, your power of attorney, your healthcare proxy. It's really important to feel like the paperwork has been done, or the conversations around this have been started with family members, with chosen family, so that you really are clear about this and not leaving this for your children, your family members to have to deal with. They will have enough to deal with with just grieving your loss. But this way, if you engage in this conversation now, you're going to feel freer, and you're also going to make your family feel like you've taken some of the burden off of them. I think that's really important. And I know people tend to put this off because they don't want to think about these things. And I think our country is not good about looking at death as part of a cycle of life. But I do really urge you to not think about it then, because what if someone, God forbid, was in an accident earlier, like in their 30s or 40s, and didn't have a will? There's still an issue for them. So think about doing that. It's really important. Then I would say, will you take the time it will take to think about your retirement? Some people will not. Some people are not great. It's the self-reflection piece, so they don't give themselves the time because they're busy people. And I only mention a retirement coach because I think having a partner that's going to create a safe space for you to think about some of these things and to really test them and to see what the pathways are when you're in the messy middle can be very helpful for some people, and some people don't need it. I have friends who have jumped into retirement happily and feel good about it. But if you feel like you want to do the reflecting piece, and you're maybe not quite ready to retire fully yet, it might be good to think about having some support in the process. And then I would say, begin to ask yourself the bigger questions. And you'll be seeing these questions shortly, but I would really say, I don't know how you process things. You may like to journal and write things down. You may like to make mind maps because you're a visual thinker, or you like to talk through with other people, but in some way, begin to visualize the next stage so you can start that pivot in your mind, which helps you not feel as stuck in your current work. If you're starting to feel a little stuck, it's giving you this sense that something new is emerging. And it also helps you focus your current work to think about, what's the legacy I want while I'm still working here? What are my priorities before I leave my current job? So doing this work is not only really great for the future, but it's actually helping you refocus your present situation. So I think we now have some questions that you might ask yourself.
So Debbie Kaplan, it's not too late to get a retirement coach. Just saying. Okay? Think about it. So how many people keep working after retirement? And what kind of work do they do? I know it's not going right from what you were doing to doing the exact same thing for another company. That's not retirement, but
right.
What are the stats on people working after retirement?
I think it's really popular. I will say, I think the stat is about 30% of people keep working for something like 5 years after retirement. I think that number is going to only increase. Partially because of financial reasons, certainly. I mean, we've had some twists and turns with the economy, to be sure. But I think the other thing is, people need purpose. And unless they can figure out what purpose will look like outside of the work realm, some people want to just slow it down, or they want to use their skills differently. I mean, that's legitimate. You may have really great skills, like your wife, but that you've used in certain ways. And now you want to kind of use these talents in a different forum. So that's really possible for people. And the phasing can be any number of things. It may be that people are working fewer hours. I think most people are looking for flexibility if they're not retiring. They don't want to work the way they did. That's for sure. So it's probably more flexibility. They can schedule their own hours or have a limited number of hours of work. But the other piece is, maybe there's an area of focus they really want, or there's a level of expertise that they have that will be very beneficial in the workplace still. So figuring out that piece and what that might look like, whether it's independent consulting or maybe staying on and renegotiating with your current work that you want to cut back, but you still really want to be engaged and maybe go deeper on certain projects. That's legitimate. And that's really happening for people.
Great, Pascal, that answer was for you, by the way. So I just want to make sure you're paying attention here, Craig. All right, I'm hitting retirement age and haven't really thought about it. As I start to think about it, what are some of the questions I should be asking myself?
Well, glad you asked that question.
Oh, there we go. All set.
Here are some. I mean, I really have about 100, but here are the ones I really think would be great to take some time on. How would you like to spend the next 5 or 10 years? For those of you that are already retired, it's not too late to do this. I mean, your earlier years are most likely to be your healthiest years. And maybe you're still working and you want to be thinking about those 5 to 10 years now while you're still at work or you're phasing your work. But I think it's really important to start think about what your priorities are. Where do you want to spend your time? It's obviously really important to know how much income you need to earn if you're staying at work. And if you aren't quite ready to retire, what do you need to be doing to sock away as much as you can? What strategies do you need? And I think also in addition to how do you want to spend your time in the next 5 to 10 years, I think it's important to know how do you want to prioritize your money in retirement. This is a great one, I think, for partners to have. I did this exercise with my husband, and it's a very simple exercise, but so there are 4 or 5 areas that you might think about that would be the biggest areas. Maybe it's family, maybe it's travel, maybe it's housing, whatever it is, any combination of things. Where do you see your money going? And doing this privately with your partner or someone close to you, and then coming back to see, are you in alignment with them, can be really interesting, because you may think your partner is right on board with you, but you may actually have very different priorities about where you would like to spend your money. And it's important to have these kind of conversations early, because it could be a real point of contention. So again, some of these things can be deceptively easy to do, but they really yield a great starting point for some conversation about how do you see your life versus how I see my life. What do you see as your life purpose for this next chapter? What will give your life meaning now? That's a huge one. As I said, without some of that anchoring and a sense of identity and utility and purpose, people really can feel, can just feel depressed or reach a point in their retirement where they just feel, is that all there is? So it doesn't have to be work. It can be any number of things. Maybe you feel like you want to be #1 grandparent during this period. Maybe you want to spend some time volunteering, some time traveling. Maybe you want to create a side gig and something that's always interested you. I mean, this is really important to be thinking about as soon as you can, because there just needs to be a reason for waking up every day. And life meaning does not, as I said, have to look the same for your neighbor, your friend, as it looks for you. This is why you have to get clear on what are your values, what are your strengths and interests, and that takes a little reflection. I remember when I was in the child rearing years, and I had to fill out some kind of an application for something, and it asked, maybe it was for a board position, and it asked about hobbies, and I literally stopped in my tracks because I didn't even know what the word meant anymore, and I could not believe that in the last 15, whatever it was, years, I had shelved any side interests I had. And I was kind of in shock. I think my jaw dropped that I had only been this mother and worker, and I left so much on the table. So what are you leaving on the table that you want to bring up again? What have you shelved that you want to do? And maybe you're much better than I, and you've built out that life. But for a lot of people that have been working and living with children or having to care for older parents, you really don't have that time to build out the life. And now's the time to do it. So that's really important to think about. I would also say, if you want to work, what does that look like? Is it full-time? Is it part-time? Is it a side gig? I mean, there are all kinds of ways to think about keeping some earned income coming in, even in like quasi-retirement. So think about that. Do you still want to, would you like to have some money that you still have coming in during your retirement, even if you started out thinking you were done? Good to think about that. And what issues motivate you to act or contribute? This whole philanthropic piece, most of the women that I work with, I will say it's almost exclusively women that have said this. They all say they want to contribute at this stage of life. They all want to give back in some way. So what does that look like? Some people want to mentor. Some people want to have board service, maybe paid board service. Some people really just want to give of hours in their church, in their community. What does that look like? It takes time to think through. If I only had one or two topics and issue areas, where would I like to go deeper? It's a great thing to be thinking about now. Where do you want to live? I mean, we can live anywhere and be also working anywhere. So do you want to downsize right now? And what does that look like? Do you want to continue to live in your present home? That's very different. And do you want to just have a completely different, do you want to be a snowbird for 6 months of the year? These are the kinds of things you could work with your financial planner if you have the means to consider other options for yourself. Last of all, and I can't underline this one enough, how strong are your social networks? 30% to almost 35% of older people wind up suffering from social isolation. And we see it happening with young people too. It's really important to continue your social networks, to not segregate yourself as this society will do. 55 plus communities are wonderful, but they're not for everyone. There's a real move to multi-generational living. And it's also really important, if you don't have a family, to consider your chosen family. Who are the people you most want to be surrounded by as you age and maybe your health is not as good? Do you have people in your network who will be there for you? It's really important to start thinking about these kind of social networks, and it's not too late to build them. It's not too late to re-engage with people that you maybe lost track of. So social networks are huge. If you leave your work, are there people you want to stay connected to? Keep those social networks alive. And I think if you, in the totality, ask yourself these questions, I think it will really help you adjust to the first part of this transition into retirement.
And I can't second that enough. I mean, the social networks are social contacts. Socialization is just incredibly important as you age. And I mean, my wife's got story after story after story of people who came into her residential community who were really just closed in. I mean, they were living by themselves, living with a spouse who was the caretaker. The caretaker passed,
Yes.
which many times that happens. The caretaker goes first. And then they came and started to socialize again and just blossomed into these extraordinary people that you would not have guessed if you'd met them when they first moved. So social contacts are incredibly important. And that's one of the things that's great about LGW. We've got our classmates, we've got the whole organization to stay connected, to keep doing things, to keep volunteering, just to keep engaged.
So important.
Proud of what we do at LGW, yeah.
LGW is a perfect example of how people can stay connected. And I think another piece of this aging piece on top of the retirement piece is to really have friends outside of your age group. It's really important to keep, that's why I get a little concerned about this 55 plus community. I think society wants to put us in a corner, but the bottom line is if we have friends of all ages, we stay vital, we stay alive. It's good for them, it's good for us. And so, it's not too late to do any of these things 10% more than you're doing right now. And even just thinking of your social network, do you have some people that are 10 years younger than you or 10 years older than you? Mix it up a little bit and just see the kind of the beauty of growing older. I have a friend of mine who's in her 80s that I met through a commission I served on. She's a real inspiration to me that getting older does not have to be scary in the way that it's painted to be. And I have many friends that are in their 40s and 50s, because, again, they bring a vitality and a different perspective. So that's how you keep that adaptability going, and it makes life more interesting at this stage. So an LGW is a perfect example of how people can really stay engaged after they're working as well.
And sometimes it's not just being with young people, but it's thinking like a young person.
Yes.
I'll just tell a quick story. It's a funny story of the gentleman who moved into the community where my wife worked. Had been married for about 35 years, raised a family. His wife passed. He married again for another 35 years. And she passed, the second wife. And then he comes in the community, he's like 103 years old, and he tells his daughter, well, I don't think I'm going to marry again this time. So. And she said, you're right, Dad, you're not doing that. But anyway, I mean, he's still thinking young, so which is great. So one of the common themes throughout this has been that there's not just one way to retire. There's many, many different ways, and it varies from person to person. What are some of the patterns that you've seen with the people that you're working with, that you're coaching?
What I love is that they come with certain assumptions. They're pretty sure they have it figured out. And many of them surprise themselves in how they change their thinking about retirement. And part of it is they may be sure they're leaving. They don't want to be at this job anymore. They're done. They feel like they're ready to move on. And they may, through the time together, they've explored. I think the exploration, that messy middle, the exploration is really important. They've explored, they've thought about other options, they've gotten excited maybe, but some of them have decided, you know what, I want to stay at this job where I am and just continue this pivot towards where I want to go. I actually really like the work I do. I just want to do it a little bit differently. So that's one. Then there are some people who have said, I have one more job in me. I know I have one full-time job left in me. That's great. Again, non-judgment zone. And then they wind up deciding I'm done. I'm really done. Through this, I've learned there's so much more that I want for myself. And I don't want to be working right now. Maybe I'll come back to something, but I really think I'm done. So I think it's that coming in with beginner's mind, like a reset, that you're not that you may have these preconceived notions, but if you open yourself up to possibility, you just don't know where you might go with this. And I love that, because I'm really there for people to be more fulfilled than anything. It doesn't matter if they decide they want to become a plumber at this stage, or they want to become a master woodworker, whatever it is fine. But it's great to know that you can maybe change your mind in the process or think differently. So that's it. I think the thing I mentioned about women and giving back is just a huge theme that I see. I mean, literally to a person, we do a values identification piece of work first. And to a person, I think every woman has chosen philanthropy, giving back, making a contribution, having impact as being one of the most important drivers for them, at least in the first, maybe third of their retirement period. So yeah, those are the things. And also I've had some people who are single, and it's really important to recognize not everyone has a partner, and not everyone even has a family surrounding them. There are some people for whom they have a chosen family, but they don't necessarily have a large, vibrant family, and they have other considerations that they need to make, which is really about, building that social network up again is really important. Many of the people I know who are single have really dedicated themselves to their work, and it's really important for them to start to make small backward steps of detachment, to see their work differently and not take all their identity from work. So I think that's important to recognize too. It's that everyone's situation is different. And some people have aging parents, which leaves very little time if they're caregiving. And some people still have kids at home, so they can't go there, or their kids are dependent on them in some way. So as I said, there's no shame in this. There's no one size fits all in it. But I think the more you can get a sense of your financial picture and start to identify who you want to be in this stage, I think the happier and more fulfilled you're going to be going into this next phase of life. Knowing that none of us really know what's ahead for us, but I think bringing intention to it is a real key. I'd love to hear from other people here who, have had varying circumstances. If you are retired, what that experience has been like, or if you're thinking about it.
I'm happy to go. My husband, Jay Facette, and myself, we are celebrating our 40th anniversary. And we've been on sort of a 3-year journey of slowly pulling back from work. And I think one of the things that COVID taught us is that we really would like to spend more time together. And I think there are a lot of couples who went through COVID and actually came out on the other side of that equation. So I think really getting to know yourselves individually and as a couple has become really, really important. I think one of the most difficult things for me has been moving from my professional identity and thought leadership to my personhood and my personal identity. And there's a sense of loss and a sense of gain that comes from that transition. And I'm still in the process of going through that. Someone once told me, and this is a common sight, is that there's the go-go years, the slow-go years, the no-go years, and then death. And I think some of the questions is, how can you take some of your money and push it up into the go-go years if you're going to be more active in those first 10 years? We're both 68. And then the last thing is that we've learned is sort of try to experiment. At the end of the year, we will retire. We both may retain some independent consulting, but we're going to Mexico for 3 months. And we're doing an experiment and a sabbatical. And we may like it or we may not. And the one last thing is that I really like the sun. And so there's a negotiation about how many months we're going to be in the sun in the winter and how many months we're going to be up here in Washington, because Jay doesn't want to leave Arlington. So it's really an interesting process.
I love what you're saying, Bob. And thank you for sharing that, because you speak to so many important points here. I think one of them is the slow going. I love that you took the time to start to step away from work. I mean, that in and of itself is not easy for many people, but once you start doing it, I think you start to recognize you have more choice than you knew in this process. So that, I think that's really interesting. I love this idea of kind of wanting more time with each other. And you're absolutely right. Not everybody felt that way after the pandemic. And I also think it's a really important question to ask if you have a partner, is to even just to start to play around with how much time do you think you want to spend together versus in activities. And maybe you won't know it until you're in it, but it is a really important thing, because we make assumptions sometimes that our partners are going to feel exactly like we do, and maybe they don't always, or maybe you're happily surprised that you share that, but it's an important conversation. And I do like this idea that you talked about, which is part of the financial planning conversation, about pushing some of the money to the earlier time where you may want to be traveling more, and you may have more activities. You may want to be just living life differently than you might want to do, let's say at 80, where you may be slowing down more, maybe making fewer trips. So I think that's really wise too. But I love that you came to this together, and that the sabbatical is ahead of you, and something really interesting. The exploration piece is such an important part of this time. And I'd love to hear, if you don't mind, I'd love to hear a little bit about, you talked about the loss of leaving your work identity. Can you tell me what you saw as some of the gains there?
I want to make sure other people have a chance to, if they want to talk before I take up more time. Okay.
Thank you for your generosity.
Yeah. I, I think that when we're deeply embedded in our jobs, our professional identity means something, and it sort of defines who we are oftentimes, especially in this city. And but it's very freeing to strip away those brand attributes of your professional life and allow yourself to be, as David Bowie said, who I love, the person that you always wanted to be. And that's kind of freeing. And it's really quite delightful. But there's clearly a loss. And I think I chose not to sweep that under the rug, because I think too often in life, we don't allow ourselves to experience the losses, which are very important to get to the other side in that transition model that you talked about. One last thing is that there's a wonderful book out there, you're probably familiar with it, Amy, Strength to Strength. And it's by a professor at the Harvard Business School who teaches happiness. And he talks about the psychological challenges of strivers as they enter the second half of their life. And I recommend it highly. It's a really great book.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That was very nice. Thank you. Amy, before we go, we got 5 minutes left. I do want to change perspective here. Up till now, we've been talking about the individual contemplating retirement, what they need to do or don't do. How about the employers? Well, what are things employers should be looking at in terms of taking into consideration the needs of people entering those retirement years, contemplating retirement, things like that? What can employers do to help?
Yeah, I think this will keep evolving, Doug, but one thing for sure is that they can be more open-minded and not assuming that all people in their late 50s or 60s definitely want to retire. I mean, it is worth, having some conversations and getting a sense of where people are at professionally, just like you would do earlier in their careers, is just get a sense of what's in store for them. But we need to start thinking differently, both about retiring and also about aging. I think that, and I see it starting to happen. It's trickling, but it is starting to happen. I think also about using their seasoned professionals on the team in different ways and really building more multi-generational teams. I mean, they talk about diversity is really leads to greater productivity in teams. And most people think about diversity of race, but diversity of age too is really important. So making sure that you're thinking about what are the strengths that different age groups can bring to the table. The other thing is, I think a lot of HR departments, they do great things about contributions to retirement plans and bringing in people to talk about retirement planning, but it's almost exclusively from a financial point of view. So I think broadening the conversation to have people start to think about these questions earlier institutionally for those people who are starting to enter this phase of life would be very valuable, because I think many people miss this kind of discussion. And I also think there has been, and there is continuing to be this exodus of people leaving the workforce. I think it's really important, again, to think about retaining people and maybe using their skills differently if they so choose. It's conversations that should be had, but I do think there's going to be a gap. We're not filling the pipeline with as many younger people, and we have this large group of older people in the workforce or close to retirement age that really might want to continue to contribute. So thinking through how to use people differently, out of the box, more effectively, and in these kind of multi-generational teams. And actually, one of the books, I have some resources I might recommend to folks if they reach out to me at the end, but there is a book about a multi-generational mix And I think it is just really important for employers to start thinking about their teams differently, and that diversity also means age diversity. So I would love to see that happen.
Amy, I can't thank you enough for bringing your wisdom and your guidance to our LGW members and family. Thank you so much. I'm going to give you the final word, but before I do, we've got in the chat will be a link to the evaluation survey for this session. We really need you to fill that out. Everybody, please, because we do value your feedback quite a bit, and we tailor our presentations based on the feedback we get from you all. So thank you very much. So please remember to click on that, fill it out, and send it in. Thank you. And Amy, let me give you the last word now.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you to LGW for having me. I love the work you do, and I'm proud to be a member, and I'm proud to be here. I just wish everyone who's contemplating this next phase of life, or maybe in it, will just recognize the potential here, and also not to be fearful of feeling all the feels, as they say. I mean, there may be a lot of different kinds of emotions showing up for you, and they're all good and they're all okay. You have time on your hands to think through how you want to live your life. And it's really can be probably one of the most fulfilling times of your life. And I really know very few people who have not felt that way about this stage of life. So enjoy it. And I'm also happy to mention some other, as I said, there are some books and resources that might be of interest to you that I am happy to share with you if you want to reach out. So thank you so much for your time.
Amy, thanks again. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.